yes, people can definitely deepfake you and I think the easiest way that you can get deepfaked is there are probably like two ways actually. The first easiest way is social media. So people probably know like I have a lot of content on social media. So if someone really wanted to deepfake me, they could take audio recordings, video recordings, and figure out how to deepfake me. The second thing is if you are on the phone call and talking to someone, they could be recording your voice on the other side and you may not know it. And what's really scary about a lot of these models is you don't actually need that much data about a person to deepfake or clone their voice.
Welcome to another episode of the ChrisRodMaxShow, where every week we navigate what's happening in the world of enterprise AI and help AI leaders understand what's going on and what to make of it. And this week, I have a fantastic guest in our show. I'm joined today by Diana Hsieh. She's leading product at Reality Defender. Diana, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Rod. It's great to be here.
And many do not know the company, many do not know what that you do, and of course, for many, it's the first time that they hear about you. So why don't we get you started about who you are? Who's Diana?
Yeah, maybe just to kick off on how I'm the head of product and my role at Reality Defender. Reality Defender is a deepfake detection startup. So we detect whether or not content like text, images, videos, audio are generated by AI. And there I lead the product team. So what you would traditionally think about product management, that's the team that I own and help define what the product looks like. So that's Reality Defender. Prior to that, came from a background of a lot of different 0 to 1 product management roles in enterprise, B2B SaaS, worked on a bunch of different companies ranging from developer tools to databases, open source solutions, and also started my own company in B2B SaaS. So definitely have been focused on product management for quite some time. But then also personally, I also just live in New York, love New York, travel, spend a lot of time looking for the best new restaurants and coffee shops. So that's just a little bit about me.
Then there'll be a lot to discuss today. So going from deepfakes, the B2B SaaS, all the way to maybe some recommendations for coffee hotspots and places you go in New York.
Yes, definitely. We'll have a lot to talk about.
So let's get started. So you were mentioning about deepfakes, and not everyone knows what's a deepfake. However, I would say that when most hear about it, they think this is something bad. What's a deepfake, Diana?
Yeah, I think when people think about deepfakes, they think about content that's often considered ridiculous, right? So when you think about like political figures that are doing things they're not supposed to be doing, or like some famous ones are political figures riding horses or floating around in space or kissing each other. It's like people think that's what deepfakes are, and that definitely is a category of deepfake. So typically when we think about deepfakes, we think about any kind of content that was manipulated by AI. And usually deepfakes are mostly manipulated by AI. So if you think about like a stable diffusion image model, it's generating that entire image from scratch. So that's deepfake. But the reason why I said there are different classes of deepfakes is that there are the traditional images, but then now we're also seeing real-time audio being deepfaked, videos being deepfaked. Real-time videos can be deepfaked too. So there's definitely what I would call funny deepfakes, and then there's like the not so funny deepfakes that can be used for fraud.
And so often we see these videos, and now you were saying also audio and images around famous figures, politicians, actors, celebrities. Can this also affect the regular person on the street? Can there also be like a deepfake of Diana, or this is only something for those who are very famous, very publicly exposed?
That is a really good question. Yes, people can definitely deepfake you and I think the easiest way that you can get deepfaked is there are probably like two ways actually. The first easiest way is social media. So people probably know like I have a lot of content on social media. So if someone really wanted to deepfake me, they could take audio recordings, video recordings, and figure out how to deepfake me. The second thing is if you are on the phone call and talking to someone, they could be recording your voice on the other side and you may not know it. And what's really scary about a lot of these models is you don't actually need that much data about a person to deepfake or clone their voice. So I was watching this really interesting lecture actually from MIT that just recently came out, and I highly recommend it. It's a great lecture. And this lecture was talking about how back in like 2020 or something, there was a really famous Obama deepfake. And the Obama deepfake actually took like 20 plus hours of professional audio, maybe even more, like basically a lot of hours of professional audio in order to make that deepfake. But now you can make a deepfake that like sounds reasonably plausible with just max like a couple minutes. So if you think about yourself on social media and you've talked for more than a couple minutes, there's enough recording of you out there to actually make a deepfake of you.
That sounds risky, maybe even dangerous, in that you're saying basically only a few minutes for recording. Anyone might call and then pose as, let's say, so phone provider or hear utilities and so on, and start asking questions, getting the recording, and out of that, get a sample that generate the deepfake of us. So does that mean we should not take phone calls anymore? What is it that we can do in order to maybe diminish the risk of being exposed to this?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people, when we think about deepfakes, it sounds really scary, right? But when you think about protecting yourself, I think it's just more as a receiver of potential deepfake scams to just be careful. Like when someone's talking to you, make sure that you have like a private code that you share with your family. So if someone asks you for money, they can say this code so you know it's actually them. Just simple techniques like that. Maybe when you pick up the phone call and it doesn't sound right, don't talk to that person for too long. Just hang up and like call them back or like call your family. Just like simple techniques like that, I think can protect yourself from most of the types of more high volume fraud that would occur with a like a regular person today.
Hmm. And in the previous election cycle, we would hear about deepfakes, but more coming from state actors, maybe a really highly sophisticated actors who would be putting out those deepfakes out there. Is that still the case, or the technology is so far that basically, let us say, anyone with a computer can go and start creating deepfakes around?
Yeah, this is actually a really great question, and I'm glad we're talking about it. I think when we think about deepfakes, there are two classes of deepfake providers. So there's the commercial providers where, you go to their website, like think 11 Labs or HeyGen. You go to their website, you provide video or audio recordings of yourself, and then they'll generate maybe a fine-tuned model if you pay them more, maybe just a regular whatever kind of adapted model they have to clone your voice or to clone your face. And then a lot of these platforms actually have security that you have to go through. So you have to say, for example, a prompt that they show up on the screen. You have to go through some like read a terms of service, stuff like that. So those are kind of protections that protect bad actors from using commercial platforms to actually spoof you. Now, the thing is, there's actually a really interesting study that some journalists put out where they tested all of the different popular platforms and they were able to bypass like a couple of them. So just because, let's say, HeyGen has really good protection doesn't mean all of them have good protection. So there are definitely commercial vendors where you can get spoofed. But I do think the bigger risk, which we're alluding to, is actually the open source projects. So right now, a lot of the open source projects that are out there are actually getting surprisingly good. So if you're a bad actor, I think you could use an open source project, fine tune that, and make a really, really, really realistic looking deep fake. And I think currently when we see deepfakes in the wild, the fine-tuned versions of the models on a specific actor or famous person still do tend to look smoother. But the other kind of less fine-tuned models are definitely catching up. So I think this landscape is going to change a lot a couple months from now. So whatever we're saying about right now is going to be totally outdated.
And the idea of faking someone, for example, like photoshopping the face of like a celebrity in someone else's body or in some vehicle situation and so on, having around for, let's say, a couple decades already, right? So this is something that we've seen and it's not new. So why is it that now we should be starting paying more attention to it if it has been in some way or the other, maybe not as sophisticated, but in some way or the other already for quite some time?
Yeah, I think that's actually a really important question that a lot of our customers and users actually ask us. Because when we're building deepfake detection, we're mainly focused on the new threat of AI generated deepfakes. But when you think about fraud, you can really defraud or create misinformation with an image with older techniques too, right? Like with Photoshop. And interestingly, even with the Photoshop editing features these days, they also use AI models. So there's a lot of AI just getting spread around everywhere. But what was your question again? The original question?
Well, I was wondering, so given that we've been having this now for a few decades in these Photoshop images and so on, why we should be worried now if this has been around in some way or the other, maybe less sophisticated, but has
Right.
not been really new?
Yeah, I think the biggest reason why we should be worried is because it is getting a lot easier to do. So even with like the new Gemini Flash 2.0 models that just came out, you can literally give it a prompt and have it edit an image and generate something that looks completely new. So the ease is just like so much easier. You could have any person off the side of the street just do it on their own. Whereas before, I think like with Photoshop, you have to like know how to, crop a picture, blur out the sides to make it look a little bit more real. So I definitely think the accessibility is a big problem. I think the other thing that is true of all of these new kind of generative AI technologies is that they're more general. So when you can create more deepfakes in more environments, in more different scenarios than you used to be able to do with Photoshop. Because with Photoshop, you still need that original base image that you work off of in order to create whatever you were trying to create. Whereas with AI, you can literally create something out of nothing. So almost the world is your oyster. There's obviously like caveats to that statement, but it's just a much broader surface area of what you can do.
You're right. And earlier you were alluding to companies such as 11 Labs. And those who do not know, 11 Labs allows anyone that create new voices. It can be for sitting from our own voice or just saying, I want a voice, for example, from an older gentleman coming from Texas and it should sound very excited. So one create these profiles and then out of text, for example, create a voice sample. And I was thinking, so in those cases, we can also see many positive aspects. So for those who do not know, Diana is also a heavily active in Instagram creator, content creator. So I can imagine, for example, for you, Diana, that you are engaging with your audiences and so on, and you might say, hey, I do not have time that talk to everyone in person. So maybe I can resort to technology such as, let's say, 11 Labs, record your voice, and then when someone reaches out, maybe they get a response from your AI generated voice. So what I'm wondering here is, are deepfakes only for malicious use cases, or can there also be maybe here some positive aspects or some benefits that we can get from cloning our images, cloning our voices in some way or fashion?
Yeah, I think deepfakes in general, I actually think generative AI in general is largely going to be used for a lot of really great use cases. So deepfakes obviously are a byproduct of having a technology as powerful as generative AI, but there are some really amazing use cases, some of which you talked about. I think at the root of all of the examples you were giving is this idea of personalization. So when we think about just customer experiences, um, any way that we interact with a client or a community, that level of personalization, I think in the past has been really hard to scale. And with generative AI, of course, like you can create a clone of yourself and talk to people. But I also think you can have more human experiences that are actually automated. So like your chatbot now sounds more human. It's more capable. It can handle more questions. It can actually finish a client request instead of like getting stuck in the middle and having to pass it on to a human. So I think there are a lot of different use cases just to scale a better user experience. I do also just like very tactically have this use case that I liked a lot for audio, which is the audiobook use case, where essentially a given audiobook apparently is really expensive to record and make. And in America, if you have like a lot of English actors, you think you want to have like a good English actor and you want this person to be reading the audiobook really well. However, when you think about like other languages, it gets really hard to find really good voice actors across all the different languages that you might want to actually sell the audiobook for. So that's like another example where maybe the quality is not as good as a human actually talking to you, but you're able to get something you weren't able to get to before. So I think those are some really fun use cases that aren't as scary as like someone trying to like steal your identity.
Hmm. Yes, indeed that. So here, for example, like the space of audiobooks will change dramatically in that, as you're mentioning, it is expensive, it is cumbersome, that have voice actors recording and so on. And then now we can just get the transcript and get the voices that we want very easily. And thinking from an enterprise perspective, so recently I was reading, for example, something that happened in Germany where there was a local administration that was supposed to buy some equipment. And some malicious actors knew about this, so they sent an email with an invoice for that equipment. The invoice looked legit. However, the bank account details were not, of course, from the vendor, but were from this malicious group. Not knowing that this is actually a scam, the local administration transferred the money, it was like €500,000 or something. And of course, after that, well, the money disappeared completely and it's impossible to retrieve it. So from an enterprise perspective, business perspective, what would you advise businesses to do in order to maybe be better prepared, in order to be maybe more aware of what's happening and maybe do something to counter it?
Yeah, that this I think this has been a age-old problem because I think in every generation, people come up with net new ways to defraud people. So I think the techniques to kind of protect yourself as an enterprise continue to kind of remain the same. I feel like the first principles are still the same. Usually what we see a lot of people employ is something that is more of like a layered approach. So basically, like in the email case, you probably want to have some kind of protection that checks for spam or known malicious email addresses, suspicious external email addresses. So you might want to have some kind of, high level layer or filter that protects yourself from that. But then what we also see is just additional layers. So for example, maybe you'll check whether or not the email is like high threat email. So things like, is it asking for a transfer? Does it include a bank account information? Or is it just like happy birthday? So classifying the threat is important. And then beyond that, we also see a lot of enterprises actually do training. So they'll basically train their employees. Hey, if it looks potentially suspicious, email them back and double check the bank account or check the original information. But I do think this kind of gets down into an even more complicated problem, which is that a lot of the communication channels that we use to talk to external parties are actually very not secure. So I think hopefully in the future we'll have a different way of, sharing information about how to pay us that's not email. But definitely there's still like a lot of business that's literally conducted over the phone or over email, and all of those channels are usually pretty not secure.
Yes, absolutely. That very often we get these emails that come from like a Hotmail email address and so on, and then they claim to be maybe like some business address and so. And another thing that I was thinking was you were mentioning that all this technology, especially from the open source space, is getting highly sophisticated, very easy to use, very user friendly, and therefore pretty much very easy for anyone that create high quality deepfakes. And what about the other side? So are there technologies that help, let's like the layman, be protected against deepfakes? I'm wondering, for example, on a phone device, maybe on my computer, that it can have like a pop-up saying, hey, this looks suspicious, or this image looks a bit off and so on, be aware. Have you seen these technologies appearing, or what's happening on the other side of the table in terms of countering these threats?
Yeah, I think we're seeing people try to counter these threats in a lot of different ways. So maybe we can talk first about the consumer side of like, let's say you want to have something that scans for deepfakes. There are technologies like that out there. For example, some of the antivirus providers have started doing stuff around this, like Trend Micro and McAfee. So they have solutions that will scan audio. I think most of them scan video too. So the problem with a lot of these consumer deepfake detection tools, and there are also a couple other in the market that you can just go up and sign up, is I would be very careful about how accurate they are. One of the use cases I've heard of that I find concerning is colleges rejecting applicants because they used AI to write their application. First of all, the model to detect whether or not something was AI generated is almost every single one I've seen so far is probabilistic. So let's say it's 99% accurate. That means 1 out of 100 of the students you're going to be wrong on. So 1 out of 100 students is being falsely accused of using AI. So I think it's an important thing, I think, as a consumer to just understand to think twice before you make a decision just based on what a probabilistic model tells you. So I think that's why in the consumer space, I would be careful about necessarily just blindly trusting some of the tools that are out there today. And then on the open source side, there are also a couple deepfake detection tools that I think are actually very interesting. Out of, I think, the University of Buffalo, there's a platform called Deepfake-O-Meter, where they actually test a bunch of different open source models and try to compare them with each other. But again, like with open source models, the biggest issue we've seen is it's often trained on a data set that was a year old, or it's only trained on academic data sets. They don't have as much access to in the wild data sets that we see. So even though they may perform really well on some academic benchmark, it doesn't mean when you use it, it's going to perform well on what you're putting it onto. So there's a lot of nuance in terms of how well the deepfake detectors work in the wild.
And here you brought two very interesting points. The first one was you were mentioning about, so here McAfee and other classic antivirus providers, vendors. And anyone who has been on the internet for the last 20 years remembers how it was so dangerous, and perhaps still is, or maybe a bit less so. You open any random attachment, then you open it and maybe you install some malware, maybe this steals all your passwords and so on. So do you think that deepfakes might evolve in becoming less like the new virus, in that, okay, by now we are a bit protected against viruses, but at the same time, these actors, in the end, what they want through these viruses is steal your information, get your bank account details, passwords. So they might be trying to do this now with deepfakes, and this might become, so to say, like the new virus of this decade.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we would love it if we became like the next generation antivirus. But I do think that the market still needs time to kind of flesh itself out. The space has been moving so quickly that people don't even really know what's going to happen even 3 months from now. So I think we still need to wait and see.
And another point that you were bringing up was around the idea that colleges are using detection tools that understand if an applicant is using maybe some technology in order to generate essays for application and so on. And I remember a couple of years back, OpenAI also released a tool for detection if a text is generated by an AI or not. And they removed it from the market because it turned out that there were quite some false positives and so false negatives. So in the end, it was very unreliable. And thinking about, so here for text tools, on one side, I notice, yes, it's getting more sophisticated. But at the same time, when I see, for example, especially I see it a lot on social media, so that people post text and then I read it and I think to myself, hey, this reads like completely AI generated. So thinking about deepfakes and especially like here images, sounds, and so on, do you see that we will be able to really understand if something is artificially generated, if this is not an actual photograph from someone, it's not an actual video? So will we be in that position, or is it maybe similar to what's happening with text, that maybe it feels a bit off? Maybe we have this feeling of there's something wrong with this, but deterministically with the system, we cannot really assess it.
But I do feel that I understand why OpenAI did that because, like I said earlier, like there are some scary things you can do when the models are wrong and people don't understand.
Another thing that I'm thinking so here, Diana, it is, so recently we had late last year the public launch of Sora, OpenAI's model for video generation. And of course, it looks very impressive. But at the same time, so all these models still struggle significantly with basic physics. You see, for example, like people floating, or the objects that they make no sense because they are overlapping in a way that in a physical space that will never happen. And I'm wondering here, given that you are in this space, seeing all the developments, where do we stand there? So will these models always struggle with just basic physics and a notion of space? Or do you feel that we are very close to having video that we cannot differentiate from actual recorded video out in the wild?
I think that we are closer than people think. Um, I'm often an AI skeptic in that I do feel that in order for video to really represent the physical world, there has to be some kind of element of physical modeling and understanding in the actual model. But I do wonder if we're actually going to get there without even needing to do that, just like training larger models, showing the model more data. And, just even, for example, if you're creating a Sora video, you can change your prompt up a little bit, fine tune it, have it run it again, and then maybe you can get rid of some of those weird things. So I actually think we're a lot closer than people think. I also think a lot of times when I talk to people about deepfakes, they'll be like, oh, yeah, well, like, generative AI is going to create people with 6 fingers. We have definitely actually seen that dramatically go down. So I think that was something that would happen in like the first couple versions. But now, like, people have 5 fingers. Sometimes they'll have 6, or sometimes they'll like overlap weirdly, but most people have 5 fingers now. So I think that problem's already starting to get solved. So even when you think about common sense reasoning, it's getting harder and harder to figure out whether or not something is real or not. But I do think that one thing that you mentioned earlier around just like personality when you're writing text is going to happen in like videos too. I just haven't found that AI models can actually fully grasp an individual person's personality or characteristics or behaviors. It's always still like it makes people look relatively general. So I definitely feel that we're moving towards a world where that personalization and like having a personal brand, a personal personality, a way of doing things, it's still really important because these models are just helping us create general representations of people in kind of that more like average use case. They're not really helping us do outlier things.
Do you have maybe some rules of thumb? What would you recommend the companies who are thinking, hey, I want to make use of these technologies. We're speaking about, for example, Sora or 11 Labs and so on. So there is here significant potential for automation, personalization, reducing cost in generating, let's say, training material, all type of marketing, promotional material, and so on. So where should they be maybe using them? Where maybe they should draw the line and say, hey, actually here makes sense to have an actual human creating this content being the actual face for whatever it is that we are doing.
Yeah, I think there are two low-hanging fruit use cases that I think people can totally use AI for. One is when you want something to be available 24/7, but it's too expensive or difficult to find a human to do it. So good examples are like customer service, answering support questions. I almost also feel like if you have like a PLG motion where it's like a self-serve sign up and you need someone to be able to answer questions or take orders, a bot could totally do that. And I think there are use cases just around just providing availability of services that you can use bot for. The second area that I really like using AI for that almost sounds small, but I think can be really powerful, which is if in your product today, there is an area of onboarding or using the product that's very manual and annoying and causes friction for the user. These are use cases that I think can be easily automated by AI. For example, like at the last startup that I was working at, we built this. Our V1 of the product was a workflow builder where sales or marketing or RevOps could go in and build these workflows on how they wanted to interact with customers, but you had to manually create the workflows. And that actually blocked a lot of people from doing it because if you think about a typical salesperson, they're not thinking in terms of like, if I do this, then I'm going to do this. That's like a different kind of like way of thinking that they don't necessarily do. So you could see how like in the AI world, that kind of very more like fuzzy problem could be solved with AI. So I think those are two cases where I think AI is really great. Um, Areas where I think you should be careful about AI is if being factually accurate is very important. I think you can still use AI, but you want to have some kind of human in the loop. So one example that I had recently was I was trying to buy a vendor who I've used before, and they're SOC 2 compliant, but their bot said they weren't SOC 2 compliant. So what ended up happening was I was like, it's okay, we can buy this vendor because I've used them before. They're really easy to use. It's fast. And then our CTO went and checked and asked the bot, are you SOC 2 compliant? And the bot said no. So he comes back to me and goes, hey, like they're not SOC 2 compliant. And so I'm like, the bot doesn't even know their own website has SOC 2 on it. So those kind of situations, I think you definitely want to either audit the bot just to make sure it's saying the right things, or just have a human in the loop. So in a certain classification of questions that you're worried about the factual accuracy around, make sure you just like double check it. So I think the factually correct area is one where I would be really careful about using AI. So even like in writing documentation, people can be very lazy about writing documentation, but I have legit seen AI just make stuff up on documentation, just write it totally wrong. So even if you have an AI write that first draft, you're still going to want to double check it and make sure it actually works.
These customer support bots that you're alluding now, so for suggesting maybe some product features, explain that product and so on, it is a great way that discuss a little bit about product-led growth, where you're also an expert and you have many things to share. So before we discuss all that, what's product-led growth, Diana?
What is product-led growth is essentially a form of both building a product and running a go-to-market motion that involves someone coming in a hands-free way. So someone can come in, sign up for the product, and just start using it. And usually the thesis behind product-led growth is you lower the barrier to entry so much that someone can just sign up, even potentially for free, and then you want to land and expand. So someone will come in, have a really good experience, and then invite a bunch of their friends. So really common examples are like Figma or Slack, all really good examples of product-led growth companies.
And very often companies have more like an enterprise sales motion. They have maybe some SDRs and so on because they say, hey, our product is too complex, requires too much explanation. But I can see here how, in other words, discussing this idea of generative media, fake, so deepfakes, avatars, and so on, how this could serve as a way to explain a complex process and so say enable these product-like motions. Do you see that happening? Do you think that, for example, in the near future, maybe we'll have AI SDRs that help us onboard ourselves with products that traditionally we'll not be thinking about?
Yes, I absolutely think that's where it's going to go, but I also know that the statement is going to be a little controversial because it involves replacing people, which I think always gets people a little scared. I think on the enterprise sales cycle right now, like at the company I'm at right now, we're very enterprise led. That sales cycle is going to be difficult, I think, to replace with bots in the near future because it's very relationship based. You have to navigate the organization. You have to know who the buyer is. Then like the user is different from the buyer. So there's all of that. But in product led growth, often the user is the buyer and the user doesn't actually want to talk to you because they want to go through this like self-serve motion, whatever they want to. They want to test out the product and decide if it's right for them. So I think actually in the product led growth sphere, there is a lot of opportunity to automate things. I'd also say that one thing I've just noticed just across building a lot of startups is it's actually very hard to train salespeople. So in that it's hard to train them to be able to react in a personalized way to certain customers who come in, especially if they're really junior. So that's how you see like there's like B2B SaaS companies with like a bunch of SDRs and all the SDRs are like calling everyone, but when they call everyone, they say the exact same thing, even if it's like a different customer with a different use case. So I think that is definitely an area that's really inefficient today, and that's definitely ripe for disruption with these AI bots. So definitely at the lower end where you're doing a bunch of outbound that's largely automated, I think that's probably an area that AI could really start to replace. But then at the higher end with like the more experienced AEs who are navigating a sale, those people are going to be a little bit harder to replace.
Yes, that's super interesting. Where you're right that I love the sales processes, relationship building, just helping the company, the buyer, understand the problem, what problem they have, and how the solution can fit in, and so on. And this, of course, it's a bit harder with maybe some AI automation compared to a human. However, you've been building here self-onboarding tools, product-led growth tools, and so on. And for anyone who, for example, has now a product and they want to make it more user-friendly, or maybe they want to enable this type of self-onboarding motions, in this age of AI, what would you advise them to do? Do you have maybe some uh, quick tricks or maybe some suggestions that you've seen that have worked? What can people do in order to make possible that their products are easier to adopt, are easier that's being used?
Right. I'm laughing because I feel like even though I work in AI, I'm also, like I said, kind of a slow adopter of AI. So I think there are a lot of things that people who are working in product-led growth or trying to build product-led growth companies can do that are very not complicated that may or may not involve AI. So specifically, the number one mistake I see people make when deciding to do product-led growth is they don't actually understand why they're doing product-led growth. So not every company needs to be product-led. Not every company is suitable for being product-led. And you can't just turn on product-led and expect it to work. So I think that's really important because people seem to think it's like a magic bullet. It's not. It's a lot of work, different culture, different talent, different type of sales process, different team. It's not something you should be doing lightly. And I definitely see a lot of people just decide that, oh, we're just going to create like a sign up button and it's going to work. And that's just not how it works. So that's number one. But in the world of AI, I think the area that I feel like is the lowest hanging fruit for a lot of these onboarding experiences is in generating personalized templates. So when I look at like companies like Miro or Airtable, just being able to actually get someone from 0 to 0.5 is really important in product like growth because you don't want someone to get just stuck on an empty page. So with AI, now you can have people generate a more personalized template or experience to kick off their initial experience with the product. And I think that's like low table stakes. That's like something that you should be looking at no matter like from day one.
So having templates for all type of profiles and industries and so on, both in terms of the communication, let's say like newsletter templates, as well as how the product starts being used, that if they know, hey, I am from maybe Rally Defender and I'm here in the cybersecurity space, then this might be the things that I need in order to get started with the product.
Right, right. Or like for example, in Miro, they'll give you a couple examples of like, hey, do you want to create like a flow chart? Do you want to create a mind map? But then you can also create your own thing. So in that own thing, you could be like, hey, I want to create like a framework for prioritizing bugs and see what it comes up with. So I think that's just like a nice, fun thing that you can include into the product that just allows you to have a more templated flow.
And You're also a content creator in AI. You've been so generating a lot of content around it. So you have a vast wealth of knowledge of what's happening in space. So I want to spend some minutes in just picking your brain in what do you see that is happening? Which trends do you see that are currently going on? And what's keeping you excited in the space?
Yeah. So I do read a lot about AI, read a lot of papers, try to keep up with the news because I think in this world of AI, everyone's scared about being replaced. One of the most important things is to learn and understand AI so that you can leverage it in the right way. So yes, I do create a lot of content. I think some of the most interesting trends that I personally nerd out about are the small language models are really interesting. So these are the models that aren't like huge, like GPT 4.0, much smaller, can be run on a single device. And then it's going to open up use cases that we had talked about earlier, like maybe on your phone, you're going to have an LLM that's actually private, only running on device. It's not sending your data anywhere, but also you could run deepfake detection on it. So there are a lot of really interesting use cases when you can actually make models small enough to run on chip. And obviously, these chips are also getting more powerful. So I think that's a really interesting trend. The other interesting trend that I think everyone already knows about, but I think is really important, is this move towards multimodal models, where a model can understand not just text, but also images, videos, audio. And I think that's a really powerful world. And we're also seeing that these multimodal models, when combined, can do additional things that they previously couldn't do if you were just relying on a single modality. So I think that's also a really interesting trend. And I don't know if I should talk about this, but agentic AI is obviously a really big trend. But I say this because I think like one of the biggest issues I have with the AI world today is that it's just overly hyped. People are just like chasing headlines, and so I hesitate about agentic AI because it is probably one of the most hyped up topics in 2025 so far.
Are there things that maybe in previous years you think, hey, this will become something, hey, it has potential, but in the end turned out to be maybe just hype? They didn't really materialize what they're supposed to be in the AI space?
Yeah, that's interesting because a lot of times if they don't turn out to be anything, I forget about it. And then it just like is not a thing anymore. I think there are some agentic AI frameworks that are being overhyped right now. And the reason why I say this is there are like maybe 5 to 10 vendors, all of who have a slightly different take on what agentic AI should look like. But we're so early in the hype cycle that like, who are we to like? How do we know which one's going to win? So I think that's one area, and actually that makes me think that a lot of the companies that I've seen that have been hyped up that end up not panning out are ones that are actually a little bit too early in the adoption cycle. So like let's say like right now there are a lot of companies who have discovered LLMs have issues with like governance and bias and safety. So there's like all these safety AI companies coming up. I think before people even know what use cases are best for LLMs, building for the safety around it is kind of early. So then when you're doing that, you better be sure that the architecture and the solution you choose is actually correct. And I think that's really hard. So I definitely in spaces where all the VCs are like, oh my gosh, if there's an LLM, there's got to be something to govern the LLM. Like those spaces, I think there are going to be a lot of companies that get hyped up really quickly and then flame out.
You bring a very interesting point around agentic AI, where it seems we don't even really have an actual definition or an agreed um, so term what it actually is supposed to mean, agents. And at the same time, I see that pretty much all SaaS companies, they are trying to rebrand themselves, maybe like reposition themselves as, oh, actually we have this agent that's doing something. You're a product leader, Diana, and I'm sure that throughout your career and maybe through peers and so on, you hear situations where so maybe some company leadership come and say, hey, we need to start adopting agents. We need to have this agentic feature and so on. When people are faced with that situation, what do you suggest do? How should they, so maybe think through maybe how can they assess if that makes sense or not, or how should they deal with it?
Yeah, this actually happened to me in my last startup. We were getting towards like the end of my startup journey as a founder. And my co-founder came and goes, Diana, have you heard about GPT? And I was like, yes, I have heard about GPT. He was like, wouldn't it be really cool if we like did something around like helping salespeople figure out which customer was the most important using GPT? And I'm like, I feel like it's a little early because back then GPT had just come out. Um, but I think this is a strategy that a lot of product people can kind of adopt, which is I think product managers are trained to say no. And they're so used to saying no to all the different requests that are coming in from sales, from the market, from the CEO, from the founders, that they end up saying no to innovation too. So from my perspective, if someone comes in and has an idea and they're trying to solve a problem, it doesn't hurt to take 10% of your time to do like what we like to call spikes, where essentially you scope it down and you test the most risky thing around that particular problem. And just take one cycle, max 2 cycles to just look into it. And then that'll give you more information than you expect just from just doing a quick test. So what we did with the GPT thing back then is I basically just built a couple prompts, used some of the example data that we had from, prior customers who had given us data, and then tried to input it into GPT, and the value add was like 10%. So when we showed this example to the engineers, the CEO, they were all like, okay, yeah, like it's just GPT's not 100% there yet. And it's not adding enough value for the use case that we're going after. But that literally took me like 2 hours of time. So I think a lot of times when people are given these kind of large questions that have a lot of risk around it, they get scared by the risk. But I think the answer is always just, actually say yes, test it out, spend like 2 hours on it, and then you'll discover something new. And then if you discover, oh my gosh, this is amazing, then maybe that's like your next big product, So that's usually how I think about handling those kind of requests.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense, especially in this space where things move so quickly, where technologies, frameworks, models, they appear many on a daily basis. And at the same time, you're right that we have limited resources and it's better to say no, but also we might be missing here some innovation that can be relevant for us.
Yeah, so definitely think it's important to at least try it.
And just to finish, Diana, so you were saying that you are here based in New York, and then so you like hanging out at coffee place and so on. Any recommendations if someone is around in New York? What is it that you should be visiting? What is it? Maybe some hidden spots, some secret tips that you have for them?
Okay. I think in New York, this is going to sound pretty bad, but I actually haven't been impressed with any of the coffee I've had in New York these days, because I think they are all starting to taste the same. I actually recently went to Taiwan and went to this coffee shop where you could choose 3 different types of beans and the espresso actually tastes different, and they could make like cappuccinos out of it. So I was like, New York is like behind on coffee. But I still like love coffee, so I'll like go like search for like different spots, and like the cafes are always so well designed and all that. So I still enjoy it. I think anyone who's coming to New York should definitely try to find a friend, because New York is no fun if you just join a tour group and go to Times Square. No New Yorker enjoys going to Times Square. So that would be my tip. Just make sure you get your to-do list from someone who lives in New York, and then you'll have a much better time. A couple years back, like my aunt was visiting New York, and I told her, you should just come visit me. But instead she went on like this tour group, and she ended up not liking New York. And I was just like, that's impossible. Like, you don't like New York because they took you to the wrong places, and like you spent your entire time near like Times Square and like Midtown, and no one likes those places. So case in point, you should find someone to make your itinerary for you.
And to wrap things up, is there a message that you like to leave our audience with? And also, where can they find you online?
Yeah, so the message I want to leave everyone with is AI sounds very scary, but I think it's just another phase in technology innovation. And I know some people want to stop it and slow it down, but it's very hard to slow down innovation. So the only thing you can do is just hop on and learn about it, and it's going to be fine. I probably shouldn't say that because we never know what's going to happen in the future. But overall, that's really the only thing you can do. Just learn more about AI, and then it'll get less scary. You can find me on LinkedIn, Diana Hsieh, and then also I'm on a bunch of different social channels under Diana Sora Bites.
Yes, I can recommend everyone that watch your videos. You have always daily snack bites, so to say, with new developments. Always very informative. So thank you so much for joining us today, Diana. And yeah, everyone should go and follow Diana. And of course, subscribe to our newsletter on their ChrisRodMax.com. And as usual, let us meet next week for a new episode that discusses what's going on in enterprise AI. Thank you so much for being here, Diana. It's been fantastic.
Thank you, Rod. See you later.